Prey 2017's main DLC, Mooncrash, is the best DLC I can ever remember playing. I don't have a big enough head to assume that it's the best DLC that has ever been released, but it's safe to say it's definitely one of the best. Which is surprising because on the surface, even to someone like myself who adores Prey 2017, Mooncrash doesn't inspire much outright excitement. Mooncrash is a roguelike using Prey's immersive sim mechanics, which sounds cool if you like both genres like myself, but it gives no indication of what that really affords the game in particular, considering many roguelikes already employ some immersive sim design. Real quick for those that don't know, a roguelike is usually a fairly short but highly replayable experience that is as such thanks to the largely variable randomization of levels, items, and many other factors. What's more, generally in a roguelike, everything completely resets when you fail. The genre is filled with extremely difficult games that can take dozens of hours to get good enough to beat, despite a successful run often being just an hour or so. Think games like FTL, Risk of Rain, or Spelunky. Immersive Sims, meanwhile, are games like Deus Ex, Thief, System Shock 2, or Dishonored. They work more like Far Cry or Breath of the Wild, where they include a bunch of systems that all work independently, but can interact in complex ways. Fire spreads uncontrollably, electricity affects metal objects, large objects can be lifted and stacked to create your own shortcuts or ways around hazards. They're true sandboxes of tools that the developers let loose to watch players and systems interact organically. If you break it and everything goes nuts, well, that's part of the fun. As I said earlier, many roguelikes already employ some degree of immersive sim design. It's not uncommon for a cascade of dominoes to collapse in unexpected ways, leading to entirely unique experiences for each player and each run. To help prevent roguelikes from being mastered using easily optimized tactics, the games usually have to some extent, play out organically on a systems level, and you have to let players think outside of the box. In Spelunky, more or less every block that makes up the world can be broken, and shop owners get mad if you steal from them or damage their shop. So if you take the treasure from an altar that appears at the top of the level, you might find the ensuing boulder crashes through a shop and makes every subsequent shop owner furious with you. That's the sort of design you expect from a roguelike already. Because of that, Mooncrash's only main draw on the surface is the fact that it's part of Prey specifically, which has particularly strong immersive sim design. But once you dive deeper, you realize it's the way Mooncrash smashes its core mechanics together with roguelike elements that really creates something special. We're not just given randomized levels to loot and shoot through using Prey's abilities. It's much more than that. Instead of just explaining it like I'm a Wikipedia page though, let's go through what the introduction of Mooncrash is like, and how realization of what it truly offers dawns on you in a beautiful way. So when I started Mooncrash, I was met with a character select screen. Scrolling through, I noticed that each character offers a unique class with unique abilities and limitations, which is different from the campaign where you're sort of a catch-all master of everything if you want to be. You're forced to pick the volunteer here and go through the tutorial round, which asks you to escape using an intact escape pod. So I did exactly this, spawning in, picking up some weapons and items, like the wrench right in front of you as you spawn, and whatever was in the boxes strewn throughout the first room in the crater. I followed the objective descriptions, looting everything in sight, until I finally made my way to the escape pod, closed the door, and blasted away to safety. Successfully escaping unlocked the engineer class. At this point, while I knew that was just a tutorial so it was supposed to be easy, I was a bit disappointed. Is this really it? I pick a character, explore until I think I risk failing and losing everything, and then escape on an escape pod? That's not really a roguelike so much as just a survival style experience with some randomized elements. When I returned to the menu though, I noticed that the volunteer was no longer selectable. Instead, he had a checkmark on top of his icon, immediately making me realize that the goal was to escape with every character, not just one. So I loaded in with the engineer, ready to do the same. I initially expected that each character had their own spawn point that varied the difficulty, or maybe the spawn points were randomized as well. Instead, I appeared in the same room that I started in with the volunteer, and immediately noticed that the wrench on the ground and the keycard that were laying with the body originally were now gone, because I had picked them up with the volunteer. Suddenly, an understanding of what Mooncrash really was smacked me in the face. When the tutorial box says that you have to escape with all 5 characters, it means you have to escape with all 5 characters. Not one at a time, but all in a single persistent round of the simulation. And any choices earlier characters make will affect later characters. So that escape pod that I used with the volunteer, yeah, that's gone now too, as are all of the items he was carrying. He took them back to Earth and I just let him like an idiot. To me, this is an incredibly interesting way to channel the persistence of prey and immersive sims that usually couldn't work in a roguelike, because once a run is over, it's over. It allows players to plan out both long-term and short-term goals. Mooncrash's secret sauce is the balance between said persistence and the subsequent resets, between hardcore roguelike refreshes and the softer roguelite elements. The simulation only fully resets once everyone available has either died or escaped, at which point the only things that carry over are your completed story objectives, ability upgrades, fabrication plans found, and your simulation points accrued. Everything else is re-rolled anew. The persistence of the world in Mooncrash creates so many possibilities. It makes it so that unless you're going for a particularly tough goal, you can still make progress even if a few characters die. Each one is a new chance to accomplish something. It makes the simulation resets feel refreshing, because they happen less frequently than in a normal roguelike, but they're also more harrowing, because maybe you'll get a particularly bad set of circumstances next time that really ratchets up the difficulty. It makes the world feel more real because resources in the simulation continue to grow thinner and thinner as you play. Eventually, other mechanics start adding more layers. A corruption meter will appear that spawns new enemies in areas you previously cleared out, each time it reaches the next corruption level. And all enemies will grow more powerful as well, making things more and more dangerous and pushing you to be fast but smart. If it reaches level 5, the simulation rejects you and resets. The more story goals you complete, the more variables will be added, from power outages and tram outages to fires or flooding that always seems to be paired with dangerous electrical damage. Doors or staircases might be broken, or the oxygen in an area might be out. It's pretty diverse, and you never know what's going to show up. And once again, this will be persistent between all of the characters during that reset of the simulation. Mooncrash also utilizes some of the survival mode stuff that was added in the base game after release, like the ability to end up with broken legs that prevent sprinting or sliding, blood loss that drains your health when you jump or sprint, concussions that prevent the use of neuromods and reduces your psi meter, and more. Exploration is the name of the game, with the goal being to escape, but player progress can sometimes be impeded by environmental roadblocks. Some goals you have might require a specific character to hack or repair something, before a later character can then take advantage of that object. Most prominently, this is required to allow the volunteer to escape through the Mimic portal, demanding setup from 2 previous runs before he can actually accomplish this task. But also, the higher the corruption level gets, the higher the skills of your hacker need to be, necessitating that you go quickly during the runs before you reach the volunteer himself. The interesting thing about Mooncrash's immersive sim qualities is that the character classes simultaneously ask you to be adept with a wide variety of playstyles and to be able to work around issues when a specific character can't easily accomplish a task. You can't stop with one character and come back later. They either escape or they die. So if they need to get into an area with a broken door they can't repair, you're gonna have to find another way through. Maybe when playing as the Director class, you can use your Mimic ability to get small enough to sneak through a crack in the door panels. Or with the Volunteer, you can use the Hunter Boltcaster to hit a button to unlock another door in the room. Or the Security class can stack big objects to reach a ceiling vent. Though it's still important to remember that other factors may make these plans harder than expected, like if the entrance to the room is also caught ablaze, meaning you might have to put the fire out first somehow. One cool thing I tried that actually worked out in my favor was during the Security class's story objective. There's a point where you get poisoned and you have to rush to the antidote and also do something else important at a terminal, both on the opposite sides of the map. You can do them in any order, so the first time I did it, I went to the terminal first. Then I just barely ran out of time before getting the antidote because I fumbled with the controls. The poison gas, though, had come out of a vent, so the next time around I went in with a Hunter Boltcaster, shot the terminal with it to activate the trap, and then stayed poison-free like a boss. That's not really a part of the Security class's arsenal that he's super good with or anything, it's just an option I knew that I had, so I tried it and it worked. Normally in an immersive sim, if you've spec'd wide into multiple class types, your choice of which option to use can be somewhat arbitrary. Do I want to stealth, or melee, or use guns? They may have advantages and disadvantages in specific situations that pull you one way or another, but you can really do any of them in a pretty standard fashion because the game has to be designed around you speccing into any of these class types. But if you instead spec narrow, like say by focusing all in on stealth, you're gonna want to stick only to the stealth approach, which is nearly always going to be viable because it has to be. Either way, it can sometimes feel a bit by the books, like a set of predestined paths have been laid out like a red carpet for you. In Mooncrash, you kind of get an in-between of these extremes, since every character is rather limited on their own, but the environment and situation usually has multiple solutions to problems if you just think outside of the box. These solutions are going to be much harder to find and often much harder to do though. It flexes the worth of each class more, but doesn't pigeonhole them and screw you over just because you came in with the wrong character first. And asking these characters to work together using planning adds a fantastic extra layer on top. Mooncrash also includes the fantastic weapon set from the base game, as well as several new options. The player can use an energy blade that can shoot psychic projectiles through walls, using a bit of your psi meter. Instead of just including the glue gun, you can also use glue grenades, which explode into a bunch of glue orbs to put out fires, create platforms to get to otherwise unreachable areas or avoid hazards, or freeze a bunch of enemies all at once so you can escape a sketchy situation. Or there's the Typhon Spore, which creates a Typhon tentacle spawner that will decimate players and enemies alike. And again, this is on top of the great options from the base game, like the Disruptor, which can short electrical systems temporarily or stun enemies, or the Recycler Charge, which will suck in any nearby enemies and objects and turn them into crafting materials. You can even use everyday objects in unexpected ways. The tram system, as well as each core area of the map, are all powered with control modules. However, shooting a control module can also serve as an EMP blast similar to a null-wave transmitter grenade, or the Disruptor. That means it too can disable barriers and things temporarily, and if you're the engineer, you can still repair it afterwards if you've got the spare parts. Can't find a control module because they're relatively rare? Destroy a harvester to get one. This is all about being resourceful. One of Mooncrash's best choices is that it balances player-driven difficulty with the increasing difficulty of the simulation. Unlike most roguelikes, Mooncrash isn't brutally challenging to complete, unless you want it to be. As you play, you'll be able to make your character stronger with neuromods, as well as accrue more fabrication plans to buy things with your ever-growing massive simulation points before a round starts. On the surface, this kind of sounds like a mistake. After all, it technically undermines the rest of the systems if you can just buy whatever you want before you start and take it in with you. but it also allows people who aren't into the sheer difficulty of roguelikes to experience the whole DLC and have a little bit of the RNG taken out. It can add another layer of strategy. I love Spelunky, but there's a whole lot of it I'm just not good enough to see and probably will never be. Here, I can challenge myself more later, but explore at my own pace on my first playthrough. What's more, you never know what obstacles you'll come across, meaning there's still meaningful choice for what to buy and how much to spend. Unless you plan to grind sim points for hours and hours, there's still some strategy for what to bring with you. After all, it would suck to not have control modules when the power ends up being out in one section and you're not really equipped to fight a harvester for one. But buying a pair of them at every reset isn't cheap, and they take up a lot of inventory space. Or what about time delays? If you buy just 5 of them and then accidentally die with a character you needed for a goal you're trying to accomplish, that's 10,000 points wasted. What you can purchase with simulation points is going to rely on you exploring thoroughly anyway, and most of them come down to the luck of the draw to some extent. For example, on my first playthrough that took about 15 hours, I never found the escape pod navigation chip fabrication plan, meaning I always had to manually find a navigation chip in the environment when the one in the available pod was damaged. There's also apparently a chipset ability that greatly improves mobility in some way that everyone recommends, which I still haven't found. And I'm sure I missed a lot of other things too. Point being, you're not guaranteed to be able to just take in whatever you want. There's also a universal secondary inventory called the Mule that any character can eventually summon at any point. This allows you to store more items, as well as store items from one character that the other characters can use afterwards. It's mostly just a quality of life thing, since you can just as easily leave your stuff in any container in the world, or even on the ground for subsequent characters if you want. So while it does remove a bit of planning as far as where to leave your goodies, and it effectively doubles your inventory space, I think it's a good option for allowing people a bit more leeway to succeed. This isn't supposed to be FTL levels of challenging, unless that's how you want to play it. The Mule also feels necessary on console in particular because Arkane was never able to shorten the loading screens between areas to a great degree, so running back and forth between areas to transfer stuff from one character to another gets old fast because of all the loading. The permanent upgrades also help to keep exploration engaging. Often in roguelikes, the fact that failure leads to losing everything means that after a while, many items lose their sheen by the time you're finding it for the 100th time. But finding a new chipset or fabrication plan or neuromod is still rewarding all the way to the end and beyond because it has both immediate and future value. For someone like myself who likes to explore, it was incredibly difficult to avoid wasting precious time by exploring every table, drawer, and corner of each room. Before I knew it, I'd be at Corruption 3 or 4 and have really difficult enemies to deal with. My point is that Mooncrash's balance is intentionally flexible, unlike most roguelikes, which I think is a smart choice. Sure, they probably could have implemented stuff like the Mule or the pre-round shop a bit better, so that they're not so abusable. But because the sheer amount of variables present can so drastically change the value of options you may find, I'd say the balance is still impressive nonetheless. I personally give them a pass, and am willing to restrict myself in the future to get a more challenging experience, though it would be nice if they'd have included the standard difficulty options from the base game. The point is, Mooncrash is fantastic, just like the base game of Prey. If any of this sounds even remotely engaging to you, it's worth playing, because Mooncrash embodies the creativity and risk-taking that everyone constantly claims they wish they saw in more big-budget titles. But what do you guys think? Have you played Mooncrash? Did you enjoy it? Are there any other games similar to it that you enjoy? Sound off in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.